Right after the moving truck pulled away from the driveway, I was still standing on the pier, breathing in the salty ocean air, when three people suddenly walked up. Their steps weren't casual. They were firm, deliberate, like they were about to hand down a sentence. In that moment, I felt more like an intruder than the new owner of this little beach cabin. Leading the group was a woman in her 40s, wearing a navy designer coat and leather shoes that had no business on rough wooden planks. She stopped, tilted her chin up, and spoke in a commanding voice. "You need to tear this pier down immediately. It violates community standards." The second I heard that, my chest tightened. I'd just dropped nearly $1 million on this place, and only hours later, someone was standing on my property ordering me to destroy part of it. I took a breath, trying to keep calm, then said, "My name's Ethan Callahan. This is my property. I just moved in, and honestly, I don't know what standards you're talking about. But if there's some kind of misunderstanding, I'm willing to talk." The two behind her jumped in right away. An older man, nervous but holding a thick stack of papers, flipped it open like he was ready to quote the law. The other woman raised a camera and started snapping pictures of my small boat and a couple of crab traps I'd left on the pier. The leader, who I later learned was named Victoria Hawthorne, smirked and said with disdain, "These shabby items ruin the image of our seaside neighborhood. You have 72 hours to remove everything. If not, the HOA will act." A chill ran down my spine, not out of fear, but at the sheer audacity. Nowhere in the cabin's paperwork had I ever seen a single word about an HOA. When they finally left, their expensive perfume lingering in the salty air, I stood frozen. A distant ship horn echoed across the water, blending with the steady crash of waves against the pilings. The world around me seemed to pause, leaving only one thought circling in my head. Why did these strangers think they owned the ocean? Right then, I knew the peace I'd been searching for wouldn't come easy. And this wasn't some random encounter. It was the start of a battle I never imagined I'd face when I left the city to find quiet on the Oregon coast. Before I ever set foot in this beach cabin, my life was completely different. Just 6 months earlier, I was running a multi-million-dollar blockchain company, with rows of servers humming day and night in a warehouse outside Seattle. Every morning, while it was still dark, I'd bury my face in 3 giant screens. Numbers danced like they were hypnotizing me. Trades flashed in and out in seconds. That was my world, loud, glowing, and completely soulless. People thought I was lucky. A 35-year-old guy with a city mansion, sports cars, and a fat bank account. But in the quietest nights, with only the roar of cooling fans around me, I felt like a prisoner chained to the blue glow of a monitor. One February night, it hit me. I'd just finished a 12-hour online meeting with partners in Europe. When I pulled off my headset and looked out the window, snow was falling hard. My legs were numb from sitting so long. And for the first time in years, I asked myself, what's all this money worth if I don't feel alive anymore? The moment that thought flashed through my mind, my chest tightened. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. For a split second, my whole life looked like one endless straight line. Work, make money, repeat. That night, I made what most people would call a crazy decision. I sold the entire company, cut it off like slicing a rope that was choking me. In the days that followed, as I signed the transfer papers, I felt shaky but strangely free. With the money left over, I knew I could buy anything. But what I truly needed wasn't another penthouse or a new car. I needed something real, something I could touch, something with the smell of salt water, the crash of waves on rocks, and the bite of storm winds. Back then, I had no idea that place would lead me into a fight. All I thought was that I was chasing peace. Right after I walked away from the tech world, I started digging through real estate listings. Hundreds of places popped up. Mansions with pools, penthouses overlooking city skylines, sprawling ranches in Texas. But none of them stirred anything inside me. I wasn't looking for another symbol of wealth. I was looking for a place to breathe. One evening, while scrolling through Oregon coastal homes, my eyes stopped on a simple name, McCarthy Harbor Cabin. The photo showed a small wooden house, roof faded, tucked between tall pines. Listed price, $900 grand. At first glance, too much for such a modest place. But then I caught a tiny line at the bottom. Includes maritime rights and existing commercial agreements. Right then, the instinct that once kept me alive in the blockchain world kicked in. I muttered, The cryptic notes always hide the real value. The next day, I met the seller Helen McCarthy. She was in her 70s, petite, her silver hair pulled back neatly. She welcomed me at the cabin's porch with a kind but tired smile. As we walked down the path to the pier, she pulled a heavy ring of keys from her coat pocket, at least 30 of them. She pressed it into my hand and said, her voice trembling, "My husband, Harold, called this the soul of the harbor." I never fully understood, but he believed that someday, someone with enough patience and vision would carry it on. The moment those keys touched my palm, I shivered. The clang of metal in the ocean breeze sent a sharp, unexplainable feeling through my chest. I asked, "Can you tell me what they open?" She gave a shy smile. "I suppose a lot of things around the harbor." I never tried. Harold handled everything out at sea. I only tended the garden. We kept walking on the pier, its wood worn gray from years of storms. I noticed details that didn't belong to a simple cabin. Huge iron hooks for docking cargo ships, high voltage outlets, even a fuel line running underground. A tiny home had no need for these. Right then, my gut told me I wasn't just looking at a vacation house. I was standing at the door to another world. That very afternoon, I signed the deposit papers. Not because I understood everything I was buying, but because I trusted the ocean's whisper and the weary but believing eyes of Helen McCarthy. I had no idea that moment would change the course of my entire life. 3 weeks later, on a chilly October Saturday, I finally moved into the beach cabin. The moving truck pulled away right as the clock struck noon. I stood on the pier, breathing in the salty ocean air, and for the first time in years, my lungs felt full of something other than recycled office AC. Just as I closed my eyes to soak it in, the sharp sound of footsteps echoed along the brick path by the water. I opened them to see 3 people marching toward me. Their stern faces, their heavy strides, it was like a patrol coming to issue a ticket. The woman in front stopped at the edge of the pier. She looked to be in her 40s, blonde hair pulled tight, blazer pressed to perfection. Her voice cut like a command. "I'm Victoria Hawthorne, president of the Coastal Haven HOA. Mr. Callahan, you need to take this pier down immediately. It doesn't meet community standards." My throat tightened. I hadn't even been here 4 hours, and already someone was standing on my land, speaking as if they owned it. I took a slow breath and said, "Mrs. Hawthorne, I bought this property legally. I don't recall any HOA terms in the paperwork. There must be some mistake." The older man beside her, maybe in his 60s, flipped open a thick binder and read like he was reciting the law. Clause 4.7 Any waterfront property showing signs of commercial activity requires approval from the Architectural Review Board. Right then, the other woman raised her camera, snapping away at my 24-foot boat and a few steel crab traps resting on the pier. Her tone was firm. "These items violate aesthetic guidelines. They destroy the upscale image our community has worked for years to create." I glanced around. Just an old boat, some rope, a weathered wooden dock. Nothing close to commercial. But clearly, their verdict was already made. I tried to stay calm. "I only fish for recreation. I'm not running a business. And I'm certain this cabin isn't under HOA control." Victoria tilted her head, eyes icy. "Even recreational use damages the character of this neighborhood. You have 72 hours to remove everything. If not, we'll sue. And trust me, legal fees will cost you far more." Right then, a longhorn blasted across the bay. I turned to see a commercial fishing boat, the name Sea Titan painted on its side, gliding past. The captain gave me a friendly wave, like we'd known each other for years. Victoria folded her arms, squinting in disgust. "See, your presence is already attracting that kind of vessel, and we won't let it ruin this high-end seaside community." In that moment, I felt a tremor of fear mixed with a surge of anger. They treated the public harbor like their private backyard. They wanted to turn the ocean's pulse into a lifeless painting. As they walked away, Victoria threw out her final warning. "Mr. Callahan, you have 3 days to think carefully. Fighting this board has never been the smart choice." I stayed frozen on the pier. The wind picked up, and a cold premonition crept down my spine. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a real war. That very night, I sat in the small living room, clutching the heavy ring of keys Helen had given me. The wind howled through the window frame, mixing with the crash of waves against the pier, reminding me the ocean was right outside my door, but peace was already slipping out of reach. I thought of my brother Marcus Callahan, a maritime lawyer in Seattle. When I told him what happened that morning, he burst out laughing on the phone. "Ethan, that sounds like the same old stunt I've seen plenty of HOAs pull. But that cabin sits in a special zone. You better take a hard look at the maritime rights. Harold McCarthy might have left you a lot more than you think." The second Marcus said that, my heart pounded, but my head went blank. I muttered, "More than I think, what does that even mean?" The next day, I set out to find out. That little harbor wasn't just rich coastal haven residents. It was fishermen, tour boats, even Coast Guard training vessels. I walked up to a charter fishing boat. The captain, a bearded man in a weathered windbreaker, took one look at me and chuckled. "You must be the new owner of McCarthy Place. We were wondering when someone would take over Harold's Marina." At those words, I stumbled back a step, my mind spinning. I stammered, "Marina? What Marina?" He frowned, then sighed. "That harbor's been running for 30 years. Fuel, docking, services for commercial boats. Everybody knew Harold. You mean to tell me you didn't?" My throat tightened. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I thought I bought a cabin, but I spent the whole morning walking the docks, talking to anyone who'd stop. A mechanic said Harold had contracts to maintain over 40 slips. A guy at the fuel station explained the HOA still paid yearly fees just to access the inlet, and all that money flowed straight to McCarthy Marina. Each story was another piece of the puzzle, and when I put them together, the picture was nothing like I imagined. I hadn't just bought a cabin. I'd stepped right into the middle of a maritime business Helen never explained, or maybe never even understood herself. That evening, I dropped the ring of keys on the table. Their clang echoed like proof I was holding something far bigger than I'd realized. In that moment, I swallowed hard, fighting to steady myself. One thing was clear: the HOA's threats weren't about community aesthetics. This was about power, profit, and a legacy I'd unknowingly inherited. 2 days later, I drove up to Seattle to meet the lawyer Marcus recommended, Rachel Donovan, a specialist in maritime real estate. Her office overlooked Elliott Bay, tall windows reflecting dozens of cargo ships moving across the water. Rachel listened as I laid everything out from the very beginning. Her eyes stayed sharp, focused, the way only someone used to complex disputes could be. When I finished, she tapped her fingers slowly on the wooden desk and said, "Ethan, what you bought isn't simple. I need to run a full record search. Don't respond to the HOA until I have the results." The moment she said that, my chest tightened. Not out of fear, but because I knew my reality was about to change completely. 3 days later, Rachel called. Her voice was calm, but urgent. "I need you to come to the office. We need to talk face to face." When I walked in, 3 thick files were already spread across her desk. She looked me straight in the eye, then opened the first one. "Mr. Callahan, you didn't just buy a cabin. You're now the legal owner of Blackwater Marina Operations, a maritime business that's been running since 1987. I froze. My mind spun, my body locked in place. I blurted out, "What? The marina is mine?" Rachel nodded, sliding over a detailed map of the harbor. Land plots, docks, the fuel station, even the Coast Guard training zone, all marked in red. "Every part of this falls under the ownership you inherited from Harold McCarthy. In fact, the entire coastal haven neighborhood the HOA manages sits on land leased for 99 years from this marina." Hearing that, I started to shake. Shock mixed with a cold rushed down my spine. They had stormed onto my pier, ordering me to tear it down without even realizing their own home stood on property that belonged to me. Rachel went on, steady and firm. "The marina brings in about $2.3 million a year. That includes slip rentals, fuel sales, charter partnerships, and a Coast Guard training contract. Harold built a small empire. And now, you're the one holding it." I leaned back in the chair, gripping the armrests until my knuckles went white. From someone chasing peace, I'd become the owner of a multi-million-dollar ocean business. Rachel opened the second file, this one full of damage reports. Since the HOA started causing trouble, 3 charter companies have canceled contracts. 1 Coast Guard training cycle was postponed, and several commercial vessels have moved elsewhere. The losses are nearly $87,000. Victoria Hawthorne's actions aren't just unreasonable, They may qualify as federal interference with commerce. In that instant, my heartbeat thundered. My mind went blank. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but the weight pressed down on me like a mountain. That woman thought I was just another new resident to push around. No, she was attacking the very operation that kept her community alive. Rachel closed the last file and looked me dead in the eye. You have options. 1, you stay quiet and let them keep pushing. 2, you fight back, assert your ownership, and if necessary, sue for damages. I took a long breath, swallowed hard, and forced my emotions down. In that moment, I knew for certain the quiet life I dreamed of was gone. Ahead of me was a fight, legal, social, and personal. And I also knew this. The HOA had no idea they were picking a battle with the actual landowner. News about the so-called rebellion at the pier spread faster than I expected. Just a week later, the local paper ran a headline in bold: "Commercial Marina threatens property values in coastal haven." Right next to it was a picture of my little boat shot at an angle that made it look older and heavier than it really was. I didn't need to guess who supplied that photo. It was Linda, the HOA member with the camera from the other day. Not long after, the stares started. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Walking along the cobblestone path by the water, I overheard a pair of women in yoga outfits whispering, "I can't believe it. If he turns this place into a commercial dock, our home values are done for." Hearing that, my chest sank with disappointment. I never had any plan to turn the cabin into some industrial site. But the truth didn't matter. Fear of losing money was enough to keep their anger alive. The HOA didn't stop with the paper. They launched a petition declaring that illegal maritime activity at the pier posed risks to both the environment and neighborhood safety. The flyer was taped right outside the local grocery store, signatures scribbled underneath. One afternoon, I walked into the only coffee shop in town. The owner, who used to greet me warmly, now just gave a cold nod. I carried my hot coffee out into the salty wind, but inside I felt heavier than the waves slamming against the shore. In that moment, I finally understood the real meaning of the word lonely. Surrounded by the noise of the harbor, in the middle of a crowded community, I felt like someone pushed outside the circle. That night, I called Marcus. His voice dropped low. "Ethan, they're playing mind games. They know most residents fear losing property value. But remember this: the law and the truth are still on your side. Don't let them corner you." I gripped the phone tight, my voice shaking despite my best effort to steady it. "Marcus, I'm not scared of a lawsuit. I'm scared they'll turn the neighbors into enemies. I'm scared I'll never really belong here." After the call, I sat by the window, staring at the black ocean. Waves crashed against the pier. Moonlight rippled across the water. The scene was breathtaking, but inside me there was only a heavy, solid emptiness. That's when a cold feeling swept over me. This fight wasn't going to stop with a few flyers or threats. It was going to escalate into something bigger, harsher, and I needed to be ready. Friday afternoon, I found a notice slipped under my door: "Emergency HOA meeting at the Coastal Haven Community Center. Topic: addressing violations from the Callahan Pier." The second I read it, my pulse quickened. I knew this was their big move. But this time, I wasn't walking in alone. Rachel Donovan was ready, armed with maps, contracts, and witnesses. When Rachel and I stepped into the hall, nearly every resident was there. The air was thick. On stage, Victoria Hawthorne stood tall beside a lawyer in an expensive suit. She kicked things off with a dramatic voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is clear evidence that Mr. Callahan is running illegal commercial operations. This threatens the value of all our homes." Right after, Linda projected photos of my old boat and a couple of crab traps. Each click of the projector slammed down like a hammer on my reputation. Their lawyer added, "Maritime law and local regulations forbid commercial activity at residential docks. If this community doesn't act, you'll bear the consequences." The room buzzed. A few residents shot me accusing looks. One woman whispered, "If our home values drop, we'll know who to blame." That's when Rachel rose to her feet. Her voice carried strong and clear, no mic needed. "Allow me to speak. I'm Rachel Donovan, attorney for Mr. Callahan. And before you vote on anything, you deserve to know the truth." The room went silent. Rachel unfolded a large map across the long table, pointing to the bold red sections. These are the property lines of Blackwater Marina Operations, the maritime business Mr. Callahan now owns. This includes the docks, the fuel station, and she paused, then aimed her laser pointer to another section, the very land where Coastal Haven stands today. For a moment, the world froze. Residents glanced at each other, stunned. An elderly man in the front row blurted out, "You mean our houses sit on his land?" Rachel nodded. "That's correct. In 1995, Harold McCarthy signed a 99-year land lease to build this neighborhood. That lease now belongs to Mr. Callahan. You're not just his neighbors, you're living on land leased from his marina." Victoria's face went pale, but she lashed out. "This is fabricated. I demand original documents." Rachel calmly smiled and handed over notarized copies, along with HOA payment records showing yearly fees still being paid to the marina. Numbers don't lie. Right then, 3 witnesses stepped forward: Captain Morales, a charter boat owner Elena Rodriguez, the fuel station manager, and James Wright, a Coast Guard representative. One by one, they confirmed. The marina provides essential services for the harbor. The HOA has long benefited from Harold's agreements. And HOA interference had already caused cancellations, costing nearly $90,000 in real damages. The whispers in the room shifted. The anger was no longer at me, it turned on Victoria. A resident jumped up, shouting, "You lied to us. You're the one hurting this community." I rose too, my voice steady but firm. "I never came here to fight this place. All I wanted was peace. But what's happened has threatened an operation that feeds dozens of families. This isn't about aesthetics anymore. It's about fairness." Rachel closed with a sharp warning. "Mrs. Hawthorne, your actions may carry personal liability over $200,000 in damages. If this continues, Mr. Callahan has every right to terminate the land lease. And that means this entire community loses its right to exist." In that instant, Victoria's face drained of color. Her lawyer quietly gathered his papers, avoiding everyone's eyes. The room erupted. Shouts, demands for her resignation, voices rising from every corner. The throne Victoria built on arrogance collapsed in a single night. When the room finally quieted, every eye turned to Victoria. The woman once praised as the shield of the community now looked like a hollow shadow, her hand trembling around the mic. She tried to force the words out. "All of this, it's just a misunderstanding. I only wanted to protect our values." But a man's voice from the middle rows cut her off. "Protect? You nearly cost us the Coast Guard contract and tens of thousands a month from the marina. That's what you call protecting?" The murmurs erupted into a wave of anger. An older woman pointed a shaking finger straight at Victoria. "We trusted you. Now all we feel is shame." Victoria swallowed hard, then lowered her head and stepped back. Her lawyer had already slipped out of the room. Rachel rose and declared, "The fairest solution is for Mrs. Hawthorne to resign immediately and take responsibility for the damages. Otherwise, we'll file suit." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then came a chorus of voices in agreement. With no way out, Victoria gave a weak nod. As she walked off the stage, I stepped forward. My heart pounded, but my voice was steadier than ever. "I didn't come here to turn Coastal Haven into an industrial dock. I came here for peace, and I want to protect this place with you. Blackwater Marina isn't the enemy. It's been part of this community for over 30 years, and I want to keep that connection alive." The room fell still, then the applause started, hesitant at first, then rising into a steady roar. In that moment, part of the weight on my chest lifted. A month later, the HOA held new elections. The community chose Margaret Shun, a retired teacher who knew the harbor's history well. She reached out to me with a warm voice. "Mr. Callahan, let's renew the agreement. This time, no more misunderstandings." Together, we signed documents that made the partnership between the marina and the neighborhood official, not only protecting both sides, but creating opportunities. 2 residents got discounted boat services, while the marina gained solid support from the community. 3 weeks later, right on the pier that once sparked all the conflict, we held a small festival. Kids laughed as they learned how to tie ropes. Adults sipped hot coffee and watched charter boats head out to sea. Standing there, wind rushing off the ocean, I knew I'd crossed a turning point. The HOA was no longer a shadow looming over me. They were partners. And me, from an outsider, I'd finally been welcomed as part of the community. Winter faded, taking with it the brutal ocean storms and the shadow of Victoria Hawthorne. Her house went up for sale, and soon a young family from Portland moved in. Their presence felt like a fresh breeze, sweeping away the tension that had hung over the neighborhood for months. Meanwhile, I spent weeks exploring Harold McCarthy's old office on the top floor of the Marina's operations building. In the middle of dusty file cabinets, I found a thick folder with a handwritten title, Future Development. Inside were sketches for expanding the docks, letters from a luxury yacht company, and plans for a partnership with a marine conservation group. As I flipped through each yellowed page, I felt a shiver, like Harold himself was whispering, "You're the one meant to carry this dream." I called Marcus, my voice a mix of excitement and nerves. Harold didn't just leave behind a business. He left a vision. If we do this right, this marina could be the leading sustainable model in the entire Northwest. Marcus laughed through the phone. "Ethan, you're sitting on a treasure most people spend a lifetime trying to build. Don't let it gather dust." Days later, I brought in Rebecca Torres, a maritime development expert. After her survey, she concluded, this marina is only operating at about 60% of its potential. With the infrastructure here and the community connections, we could double it in 3 years and tie in education and ecotourism programs. My heart raced as my head filled with possibilities. We launched the project with open forums, inviting residents to share their ideas. Margaret Chin stood beside me, speaking gently. "This time, we won't let misunderstandings divide us. The marina is part of the community, and the community will be part of the marina." The response floored me. Many residents, some who'd once signed petitions against me, now raised their hands to volunteer for the advisory board. One quiet elderly woman broke down in tears as she suggested turning the pier into a place where kids could learn to fish. So they'll know the ocean isn't just scenery. It's life. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the future where the marina wasn't just a business, but the heart of the community. By spring, we opened the Marine Education Center. Kids from 3 surrounding counties poured in, their eyes wide as they touched rock crabs for the first time, listened to waves echo inside seashells, or tried steering a small boat under Coast Guard guidance. From the balcony, I watched their smiles and realized this was real wealth. One evening, as the sunset painted the water red, I walked down the pier. Charter boats returned from their trips, carrying families full of joy. From a distance, a few neighbors waved at me, no suspicion in their eyes, only warmth. I stopped, resting my hand on the wooden railing. In that quiet moment, I asked myself, is this why I left the tech world? The answer pulsed in my chest. Yes. I once thought I was searching for peace, but what I'd really been searching for was belonging. And I found it not in glowing screens, but in the crash of waves, the laughter of children, and the firm handshake of neighbors who no longer saw me as a stranger. Victoria Hawthorne had tried to cast me out, but that fight opened my eyes to Harold's legacy and to my responsibility to protect it. Today, when I step out of the cabin, I no longer feel alone. I'm part of Blackwater Marina, part of Coastal Haven, part of the endless rhythm of the sea. And what I've learned, after all this, is that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't crushing your enemies. It's standing tall, thriving, and becoming the pillar a whole community looks up to.